Best of r/Tales from Tech Support episode 30. I tried posting this story earlier but apparently this sub has a 24-hour rule. Sorry for breaking the rules, but I'll do my best to behave so that I don't get sent to the corner. Also, yeah, I curse. When you put up the people I have dealt and currently deal with, your filter becomes pretty thin. If cursing ain't for you then maybe you shouldn't read. Back again to tell stories about Mr. Ascetic, the list, and whatever shit comes to mind. My current job is great, keeps me busy enough so that I feel like I'm working but not so much that I'm overworked. It's nice to run a department full of people who know what they're doing and don't rely on me for direction. Fair warning, I'm going to be referring to some things and people I mentioned in my last story. No, I will not define shit again for you schmucks. If you have the time to read this, you can read through my post history. Most of you should be working. Then again, if any of my employees were on here instead of working I probably wouldn't give a shit. I just want the things that need to be done when they need to be done, and I don't care how early they're done. As I mentioned before about Mr. Ascetic, he couldn't manage shit. I would like to imagine that it was because he didn't want to, but there's a high chance that he didn't know how to manage people. Maybe it was a control thing. Maybe it was an insecurity thing. He didn't trust anyone to work without his explicit direction and wouldn't let people deviate from what was on their list. Today's diatribe is about the time I imaged computers for 2 straight weeks because that was the only thing on the list. It was the end of the semester. Faculty had already made their new tech requests for the new school year. Old faculty who liked to flee the country during the summer brought their laptops in for their annual checkup, which involved either the schmuck next to me who showed up I think 3 times the entire time I was employed there or myself pressing the find updates button that served no purpose on their laptops and then sending them on their way. Annual inventory, story for another time, was done. End of the semester meant that because I was the only one showing up for easy beer money, had to update the computers we had in-house. The problem is that we had an easy solution for computers running OS X and no solution for computers running Windows. Let me backtrack a bit to discuss Mr. Ascetic's computer preferences. In my, now, 13 years of working in IT, exactly one person I worked with preferred using Apple products over Windows machines. That person was Mr. Ascetic. When I worked for him, he only used Apple products, and he would outright deny faculty's requests for Windows machines because he felt that they were not aesthetic enough for the department. Instead, he purchased $5 Macs and then dual-booted them with varying degrees of success, which is another story for another time. He wanted the entire department to run on Apple products for reasons that to this day I do not know. Back to the story. On my list for the day was to reimage the public computers we had in the building with the newest version of the OS and any updated software. There were around 100 Apple boxes and 25 Windows machines. The Windows machines all belonged to older faculty, and the 2 deans, who went to the department chair when Mr. Ascetic initially denied their requests for Windows machines. Now, I need to make something clear. I know how to efficiently reimage computers so that it takes an afternoon rather than an entire pay period. However, when it's the only thing on my list and I wanted to play Skyrim, there is no way in fuck I'm going to efficiently do something and then sit around waiting for something else to do. I'm going to take my sweet ass time and steal from the idiots in the cloud district. Fortunately, that was made easy when our solution for Apple boxes was a single USB that had the department ready OS X image. It was the only USB over 16 gigabytes we had. Yes, I shit you not, we had exactly one 32 gigabytes USB drive that we could use. Everything else was 2 gigabytes. No, I do not know fucking why. My office space, not the office itself, was large enough for my computer but small enough so that I could only bring in one machine at a time to reimage, because again, one desk, one USB, only so much space. I wanted to play Skyrim, so off I went. I would bring in a computer, set it up, plug in the USB, and it would do its thing for a few hours. I would play Skyrim while it was happening. Every few hours I would swap out the computer, rinse and repeat. No problem. Day 3 of doing this I was in my office fucking around in solitude when Liverlips walked in. Liverlips was an IT friend. I use this term extremely loosely, who worked in another department across campus. He and I would grab drinks after work and complain about the work we were doing. I gave him the name Liver Lips because I don't think that he should have ever been drinking given his health, but he drank more alcohol in one sitting than I did in a week and somehow made it home, and he did it daily. Alcohol was always on his lips, therefore he is Liver Lips. Story for another time. 2. Liver Lips walks in. At this point, he knew about my list nonsense but was smart enough not to test the waters given the amount of shit I put up with from Mr. Ascetic. He sees a computer on the desk next to me and sees that I'm fucking around on my computer. Shouldn't you be working? Shouldn't you be sober? He chuckled before confirming our after work drink plans. How long have you been playing? Dunno. 3 days. Imaging computers? Yup. Have any extra USB drives lying around? Yeah, I got a drawer full of them. How many you need? 2 less than the one I have now. Leave before Mr. Ascetic comes in and asks to borrow some of yours. He leaves to go back to his dungeon. Another sidebar about Liver Lips for you schmucks. To this day I still do not know where his office was. All I know is that he had a smaller space than I did, more spare tech in his office than any other department on campus, was about a 10-minute walk away from my building, and was in an entirely different space than what was on his department's website. He also had this weird way of appearing in my hallway and or office when I needed to borrow some of his department's equipment, since we were always missing shit. Uncanny as hell. I paid him in booze, though. I get back to fucking around in solitude. A few more days pass and I get tired of the Regent Quest bullshit, since I didn't realize that there was no end to them. They repeated infinitely. I also finish up reimaging all of the Macs faster than I had planned, meaning that I had to come up with a slow way of imaging the Windows boxes without deleting our department's Mac image from the single USB we had while b. not asking for additional resources from Mr. Ascetic himself, because asking for anything was met with a I'll think about it. I don't think we can afford that request at this time after purchasing some overpriced proprietary bullshit from Mr. Jobs Anus. I couldn't do this job in the efficient and high-paying way I was taught to do. I couldn't Skyrim at home without the then girlfriend, now somehow wife, getting in the way needing help with some shit. I was the Dragonborn. My people needed me. I texted Liver Lips. Hey, need to slowly image the Windows boxes. What should I do? Dunno. Have any old Windows CDs lying around? Yep. Problem is that I need something just efficient enough so that it looks like I'm working but I can't touch our only USB. Okay. I got up from my desk to go get my leftover pizza lunch from the fridge. I walked by Dr. Cat Lady's office and checked in to see if she had internet. 6 cat videos and 3 professional portrait photos of her cat. Later I walk back to my desk with my leftover pizza to find a little manila envelope. I open it to find 2 USBs, a 32GB USB with a new Windows OS image on it, only, and a blank 8GB USB, that I would use to fill with the most recent versions of our department's installers, and a note. 5:15 PM. Happy hour. Perfect. 1 USB for re-imaging the Windows boxes and another for porting the department data. Best part of it was that they were mine to use without Mr. Ascetic knowing about what I was up to. I also owed Liver Lips a round of drinks, which usually equaled about 3 Long Islands and a Miller High Life for him and a double vodka and bud for me. I brought in the Windows boxes in one by one, updated them individually. It took about 7 days, and I finished the base game of Skyrim in about 100 or so hours. At the end of the second week, Mr. Ascetic decided to drop by my office, conveniently at the time I was finishing up the last computer. How's the imaging coming along? Good. This last computer isn't allowing me to boot from USB, so I had to wipe the entire thing. Ah, good. Did you try Windows Update? Another sidebar. All of the Windows boxes we had were unable to access or even do Windows Update because of some bullshit policy we had on campus for the computers that were property of the university. If you tried clicking check for updates, it would always show no updates. The joy of customized firmware. Mr. Ascetic did not know that because, fun fact, he hadn't used a Windows box in the decade or so he had worked there. He actually didn't do any updating. Another story. He didn't know how without breaking one of the computers in his office. Oh yeah, no updates. It might be the hard drive failing. This is a 7-year-old computer, you know. It can't be. I've never had a hard drive fail on me. /u/isnt. Try another Windows CD. When you're done with that, I need you to help with the website. Sure thing. He walks out of the room and left for the weekend. It was 4 p.m. He came into the office at 2 p.m. I finished updating the computer, put it back in the dean's office, and left for the day. He never did find out about the fact that I had 2 USBs from another department for Windows machines. About a month after I did all of that, in efficient work, he decided on a whim to purchase some 32GB USBs for the staff to use. 5 of them had OS X images on them and 2 of them had Windows images. At least I got paid to play Skyrim. And the computers were updated. This was a lot longer than I planned. Then again, this ended up being a lot more fun writing out. Let me know if you have any requests on what my next story should be about, or if I should clarify anything, or life advice. I have a lot of it. I mentioned before that there's a 24-hour rule for this sub, probably for the best. I've written out 2 more stories, 3rd in progress. You'll get them in time. Thank you. Next. Before you ask, yes, this is a new account. This is a throwaway since my main account reveals just enough public data about me that any old co-worker of mine could easily discover that it's me, and quite frankly I'm too lazy to reply to angry emails. I know that this sub is for stories about working in tech support. Well, I have many. Grab a beer, pull up a chair, pull up your damn pants, wash your hands. The majority of the stories I plan on telling will most likely involve my old boss, since, quite frankly, the man probably shouldn't have worked in tech support. Actually, scratch that. The man was unqualified as hell. He should not have been let anywhere near a computer nor answer questions about computers. But I digress. Herein lie the tales of working for Mr. Ascetic. He will be called Mr. Ascetic from now on. This is the first and only time I will be explaining this. A little about me. I decided to go back to school after working in IT for a few years since I wanted a pay raise and a new job. When you're a college graduate who's working with mindless punes who can't tie their shoes and think that a formal work outfit is gym shorts and a shirt that says beer in/beer out with up and down arrows pointing exactly where you think they're pointing. You need a change of pace after educating these folks about how to interact with the opposite sex. Or the same sex if you swing that way for you politically correct whatever the fuck people. I was done at my old job, wanted to go back to school, decided to move to a college town and get another degree. After a month in the new department at the college, where I was a student, I was talking to one of the older faculty members who was complaining about how bad their brand new computer was running. I casually mentioned that I just left working in IT and that I could take a look if he wanted. He said no, he would instead contact the department IT person Mr. Ascetic, since that was what he was supposed to do. Odd, why would an older faculty member making more money than I have ever made, at the time, be afraid of an IT dude? I promised Professor Schmo that I could easily take a look and that it would be no issue. He instead told me that Mr. Ascetic handles all requests and he's always hiring part-timers if I wanted to make some extra cash. I let the old timer do his thing and I went on my way. After another month I met the dude. He seemed nice. Quirky. But nice. Imagine meeting a restaurant owner's son who works at the restaurant but won't admit that his dad is the owner even though the restaurant is named after them and his name tag says owner's son. Actually, he's really fucking quirky. My description of him is terrible but not as terrible as the cell service I get when I'm at home. Fuck you, Verizon. I told him, in passing, that I worked in IT for a few years and that I wouldn't mind working for the department. He hired me on the spot. I learned that he violated our fair employment policies by doing that, but who am I to judge extra beer money? He didn't seem desperate to have me, but he seemed quite interested in my qualifications and the fact that I lived a few minutes away from campus. It was an easy gig. I shared an office with 3 other schmucks who showed up every other week for about 2 hours. I got to work as much or little as I wanted. I could show up in sandals and shorts and no one would bat an eye. Easy money while I'm back in school getting an advanced degree. My duties involved me checking a whiteboard list that Mr. Ascetic himself maintained, every day and doing the tasks on that list. These tasks included piddly shit, like checking on Dr. So-and-so's computer that had a bad keyboard, to imaging computers, to the occasional research job that asked me to look up specific computer models for future purchases. Whatever I completed on the list I was to email Mr. Ascetic and he would walk into my office to cross it off. We were not allowed to touch the list. We were to follow the list. One day I was tasked with updating a set of computers and installing some bullshit software on them. I don't even remember what it was, but I felt that it was an unnecessary installation. But hey, it's easy work. I could install the software while I watched basketball on my personal computer. A few hours in, I decided to go make myself some coffee. While I was in the kitchen making my coffee, one of the newer faculty sees me and rushes in. She was frantic. She had no internet and was freaking out since she had some email to send or some shit. I don't even know anymore. All I know is that she couldn't access a cat video. She asked me to take a look at her computer. Being the nice chap I am, I say sure. I leave my coffee in the kitchen, walk to her office, and find that the Ethernet cord was unplugged. That's it. I plug it in for her and she goes on her way to watch Mittens play with a piece of yarn. I grabbed my coffee from the kitchen and walked back to my office to resume watching the Bucks lose their 10th game in a row to fucking Utah. Mr. Ascetic is waiting for me in my office and eating a peeled orange like an apple. Yes, eating a fucking orange like some weird henchman. Where were you? He asks me this in between bites while orange juice gets all over his hands. I fixed Dr. Cat Lady's computer. She didn't have internet. Ethernet was unplugged. He puts the half-eaten orange on my desk and points to the list. Odd, I don't see that on your list of tasks. The software I'm installing is still installing. See? I point to the computer I was working on. That was on 70% still. I don't see it on the list. Okay. What would you recommend I tell a faculty member next time? He picks up the orange. Have them email me. He begins chewing again. Dr. Cat Lady didn't have internet. How could she? That's not your problem. That's hers. Don't waste time on things that aren't on the list. Okay. Later that day Cat Lady comes by again with no internet. Hey/you/is it I need to watch my cat videos. Internet please. No can do. You need to email Mr. Ascetic. But I don't have internet. I'm not allowed to help you unless it's on my list. I point to the list of tasks. She looks confused but says okay. Leaves me alone to watch the Bucks lose. A few minutes later my phone rings. It's Dr. Cat Lady. Where's Mr. Ascetic? No idea mom. Is he not in his office? I called him twice. No answer. Fine. She hangs up. I install software for a while longer before I get tired of doing my work and pack up to go home. Mr. Ascetic walks in. How's it going? I'm done for the day. Dr. Cat Lady has no internet and she can't email you. Okay. He leaves to go do whatever the fuck he does in his little office that has 3 computers and none of them are functioning. As I'm leaving, I get an email from the department chair, addressed to Mr. Ascetic, saying, Dr. Cat Lady needs internet. Has had no internet for 3 hours. Fix now. I then see the department chair rush past me to Mr. Ascetic's office. As I'm leaving I hear her yelling at him for mismanaging staff and not keeping the department up to date. It wasn't on the list. Not my fucking problem. I have more stories about the list and Mr. Ascetic. I have to go eat dinner. Thank you. Next. I work on a service desk. What hand out new phones to all their employees. At the moment we give new phones who work for us. So far no problems. But we have employees who work outside and do gardening stuff for the city. Some of them have old and I mean old phones, some of them don't have even touch screens. 2 weeks ago, I had given a new phone to one of them, but you guessed it, last Friday he came back with his new phone. His screen cracked, you couldn't see nothing on the screen. His words were I dropped it and stepped on it. I thought how do you don't see a phone that you dropped on the floor? He couldn't accept that, doesn't he? Has to pay for the repair of the phone, but in the contract that he signed is stated that any damage done to the object he is given he is responsible for the cost that brings with the repair. That same day we hear that he's sacked because of swearing to his superior. End of that story. but I am afraid that there are more coming with broken screens. Thank you. Next. So, I've previously mentioned a couple people and this story involves one of them. It wasn't Alan. The company was setting up a satellite location. It had happened previously and failed somewhat miserably in the first case, so they decided to send an operations manager to get things set up. While there for months on end, he got romantically involved with a local staff member. No shame in that, he was reasonably freshly divorced and on the market. Now this is relevant to the story later on, but it's one of those what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas things, or so you think. One of our teams had a requirement to have some simple instructions for their guys regardless where they were, and the company was cheap. They didn't want to do the right thing because it costs that money stuff. So against our better judgment, we let this team have a directory on our AD's DFS sysvol. The idea, some simple HTML files that they could replicate over FRS to the AD servers which also did DNS etc etc. They could just open a browser to an AD sysvol location and their data was there. For some time, this was fine. They followed the rules and we did what we needed them to do. But about a year and a bit in, we were dropping space on our domain controller drives, to the point we were getting alerts and wondering what the hell was going on. So we started to investigate and it turned out that because home drives were stupid small and user local drives were stupid small, the operations manager had created himself his own directory there and started keeping a lot of stuff on the servers. Which of course was open access for anyone to read but still only a couple with that restricted write access, which he was one of about 3 people with that access. So while we did the investigation, he kept a bit more on that location than he should have. It turns out that while working, he was having Skype calls with his lady. Not really a bad thing, but they were video chats. She was usually in bed wearing not quite much and he was snapshotting the conversations. Thankfully, she was covered, usually in some gauzy fabric that betrayed how cold it was there at the time in question. But there were a fair number of these and they were roaming around openly accessible on our domain DFS. It was at this point, we had to find a way to clear the data without letting the cat out of the bag. His girlfriend had since immigrated and moved to our office and they were engaged, but some of us had seen more of her than she would have preferred. Sometimes, my job is just a bit more interesting than others, but this was a first. The moral of the story, don't store anything personal on company servers. Thank you. Next. Okay, some of you folks may remember that my first post was a little hard to understand and you thought my English might not be my native language, but I am now got my speech to text software up and running. Without further ado, let's proceed to the story. At the time I was a child, and my father was working for a rather large company doing wholesale of lawn care supplies and equipment, and he took down the entire company IT infrastructure over one weekend. Few things you need to know about my father that will make this post rather hilarious. My father at the time does not know how to work with computers in terms of coding. Till this day I am still having to teach them how to even use Microsoft PowerPoint and navigate the file structure of Windows. He still cannot grasp the concepts about the internet and email, along with typing skills where it is one key at a time with one finger moving around the entire keyboard. So on to the story. At the time my father's company just came out with a 52-inch lawnmower. Now, due to production issues you could only get the lawnmower to the customer if they had actually paid for an advance without seeing because there were no floor models available for the stores, which made it incredibly difficult for him to make the sales of the lawnmower without having one for the customer's view. Now, very important, let's just say my father works in an area of the state at the time which has the highest per capita of lawyers in the entire United States of America, in which some people refer to as the Gold Coast in the state. Therefore the contractors want to see in view the lawnmower word to justify the expense and make sure that they were going to get sued by their customers, because the lawnmower would damage their property that they were taking care of or it would not be functional enough, thus losing the contract. So my father got frustrated. When this happens things do not generally go well, especially when computers are involved. So on a Saturday my father got the bright idea at the end of the shift to order 99,999 lawnmowers, with the message line of please try to send at least one. Well, this would be the problem that the IT department did not anticipate that somebody would order 99,999 lawnmowers. You would question, now why is this a problem? Well, if you would order 99,999 bags of grass seed or fertilizer, so when the order is sent to the corporate office, the printer would just print one line for the entire quantity of product. However, there is a difference between bags of fertilizer or grass seed and equipment. That major difference is a serial number. Each piece of equipment has its own unique serial number. Therefore it prints one line for each piece of equipment because of the serial number. Now, recall that I said that my father did this on a Saturday afternoon. So therefore nobody is in the corporate office Sunday morning or Sunday in general, and the office workers come into the office Monday morning. Therefore at midnight the printer starts printing the order, and print it did. With the message line on each line, please try to send at least one. So the printer prints all Sunday and maybe into very early Monday morning before the printer quits. Now keep in mind, this is the era of the track printers with the matrix dot heads, with the ribbon that goes back and forth. You older tech folks, we know exactly what I'm talking about. With the continuously feeding paper with perhaps maybe tens of thousands of pages attached to it, go over, rip the page off as it comes off the printer in, and ripped a little track besides off holes. So Monday morning rolls around, they go to open the door to the printer room. They cannot open the door to the printer room. Yes, I said printer room. Now it would have been too bad, except for the one fact is that they had their public quarterly meeting for Q3 to the stock market in the next few days a week and need the computer system to calculate the numbers for the stockholder meeting. They had to hire people overtime to fix the problem. Keep in mind, the corporate headquarters is located in the next time zone over in a different state. Then my father gets a phone call at work, which he said was the VP at the company at the time, asking him if he had spilled coffee on the keyboard. He said no, and the vice president then proceeded to tell him what had happened at the corporate office. Surprisingly, my father kept his job at that company for a decade more to come. In fact, I don't believe he even received a write-up or reprimand for ordering 99,999 lawnmowers. About a decade later, when he had another issue with IT, when the older people in the department couldn't believe that was him that was calling for support. Apparently that Monday morning in that company is legendary. What makes this more insane, as I mentioned before, my father doesn't even know how to program or barely use the internet. They mention this was the mid-90s. Illiterate computer user took down a major corporation's computer system with no computer training whatsoever, because a programmer did not anticipate such an input from an end user. This is why when I code I make sure to think of every input to a user can put in. That's ridiculous to see if it can crash my program that I have written. Thank you. Next. Simple frustrating story from a few years ago while I was working at the local hospital. We had a brand new comms room built when a new wing was built onto the building. This room had all the patching for this new wing in it, as well as a few failover servers and switches, etc. The room had been fully wired by the contractor for power before we ever went in, so as we'd fitted everything we just plugged the kit into the PDUs. There were 4 in total, all on their own circuits that had been installed. A few months down the line, one of the PDU monitoring boards failed. Annoying, but it happened, so we needed to swap it out. Now while these are supposed to be hot swappable, our policy said it had to be powered down. Not a big job, everything in the room was labeled and numbered. PD1. Commando socket 1, breaker 1 etc for all 4 circuits. So I walk in there and check I've got the correct PDU. PDU 1. Okay, power down, the box is connected to PDU 1. Then turn off breaker 1. PDU 4 went offline. As soon as I realized it, I quickly turned it back on. PDU 4 comes back on. Check it once more just to make sure I didn't knock anything. Nope. PDU 4 is connected to breaker 1. I lift the floor tiles and find the commando socket which PDU1 is connected to is labeled 4. It's labeled backwards. I turn everything back on from PDU4, and then answer the call from my manager asking if I'd flicked the wrong breaker as the wrong failover boxes were reporting down. I explain, and after some choice words from my manager about the contractors that built the room, and while he's still on the phone I turn breaker 4 off, and PDU3 goes down. After a few more choice words from myself and manager, he agrees to let me hot swap the module and get everything back up. But in the end PDU1 was connected to socket 4 which was wired to breaker 2. Every circuit didn't match in any logical sense. I still don't know if the contractor that wired the room was inept or just really sadistic. Thank you. Next. This isn't quite tech support, but I hope it's near enough. It happened years ago but was good enough that it stuck in my mind. When our university's latest mainframe was installed, it came with a site engineer. For quite a while, one of these was someone who was a graduate of the same university. He was somewhat of a company man, and was not keen when we abandoned the manufacturer's operating system in favor of a different one, written by another university. I managed this system. It had a novel way of handling file store and, for the purposes of this story, peripherals such as printers. These were managed via a spooler process, which handled all of the exception conditions, farmed out to it by the actual supervisor, kernel. Whoever wrote the code, a friend of mine, as it happened, had been a little obsessive about detailed error messages, a good thing, and possible because all of the messages were inside a paged process so they really cost nothing. One day, we saw a message we had never seen before. I forget the exact text, but it indicated that a particular fuse had blown in the printer. We duly called the engineer from his room. He looked at the message, and shook his head, stating that no such fuse existed and our system was wrong. We pressed him on this, and after casting his eye over the defunct printer he retired to his office and manuals. He returned a few minutes later, bearing a fuse. He silently opened a small panel in the printer casing, and changed the fuse.